What's up YouTube, this is Tubedigga. In this video I'm going to address a question that was emailed to me by somebody called Miguel. And Miguel asked, how do we create generative melodic sequences in the MPC and keep them in scale? Now what I think he meant was, how do we keep them in key in the particular scale that we're in for the particular melodies that we've created? So hopefully I've interpreted that correctly. So my workaround for that involves a little bit of jiggery pokery, but also you do need to be running MPC 3.6 with the MPC Pro Pack installed, which is a new feature that was released within the last week or so. And it kind of falls in line with the release of the new MPC Live 3. So if you go to menu and go to preferences, and you'll see that I've got the MPC Pro feature pack installed, and one of those features is clip launch, which those of you that are familiar with the Akai Force will recognize. So I've got the icon here and you can see that I'm using the clip matrix. So my workaround for Miguel's question is to create multiple clips. So initially I've created one melodic phrase, which I'll play back to you now. And I've basically gone into the clip matrix and I've pressed and held on that. I've copied it and then I've just pasted it to these additional clip slots for the particular plugin track, which is Dura in this case. So this workaround is universal. This will work for different track types because it involves using the clip matrix, which means we can use it for different melodies that we've created in a drum program or a Keygroup program or even a MIDI program. It's just basically the fact that it's the clips that are playing back different variations of notes. So unfortunately, I've had a dig around and there isn't any other real facility for us to go into one of our clips or a sequence, which this is basically the same thing, but we are launching it from a different area of the MPC. And unfortunately, we can't just grab all of these notes or some of these notes or one of these notes and maybe press edit or press and hold shift and maybe tell the MPC we want it to randomize that note but keep it in scale. So this is the workaround. I've copied that clip to these 5 other slots, randomized the events. Okay, so I've gone in and I've grabbed some notes and I've transposed them up or down at random, blindly, without knowing whether they're going to land on sharps or flats and be out of key with this. But then I've gone to edit and just press pitch quantize to get them back into key with everything else. And I've done that for all the clips. So all the clips are different, but they've all been pitch quantized so they stay in key. And if I were to do that with, let's say 64 of these clips, I would have a massive bank of clips that kind of retain the same melodic theme, but do have notes that change every time a clip is triggered. So then how do we trigger these clips at random to get that generative idea that Miguel was asking about? Well, it's really simple. We go over to the row launch buttons here. We press and hold on any one of them and you can press settings. And Ableton Live users will recognize this. We've now got follow actions here. And we've got a big list of follow actions that we can choose. The one that I thought would make the most sense is to random exclude this, which basically means if I trigger this row, it will trigger another row at random, but not the one that I've just triggered. We can choose random include this, but that means that if we trigger this row, it may well play that back more than once in succession. I just wanted it, for the sake of this video, to show you that it's going to play these back at random, but of course you can choose any other follow action behavior that fits what you're trying to achieve. So I will play back this now and show you that in action, and it's going to play back these different variations of these clips in a random fashion. So that's the first and main workaround that seems to work the best. Let's go back to the main page and let's take that out of solo. Let's go up to the next track. Now the next method that I thought might work is in MPC drum programs now. If we go to program edit, we have the mod matrix in here. And what's possible with this is what I've done basically is bounce out all those clips that you saw in the clip matrix. So if we press and hold on any one of those, we can copy that to our arrangement. So if we go to the arranger, you can see that I've got a 14 bar sequence here. So initially, before I made this video, I did have 7 sequences, or 7 clips, should I say, in the clip matrix, all 2 bars long each. So I've populated those for every 2 bars, and that's how I've ended up with 14 bars. What I did was then press and hold on that, and you can see we've got bounce to sample. So I bounced that to a sample, and you can see it says bounce plugin 001, which is Dura, which is what the clips were triggering back. But you can see that I've added slices or regions. So for 14 bars to get one region exactly for each slice, I had to choose 112 regions. So if we go to regions, you can see they've got 112 there. That's 14 bars pretty much for every one of these different notes. Now at this point, you can either choose to create a new drum program using the slices, or you can just use this in any drum program as it is. It has the information it needs as long as you tell the drum program that you want to play back slices, which I did. So if we go back to the main page and let's go up to the bounce. Now this is just on one pad. So we go to program edit, and this is that sample chopped and all the slices. So how do we get this to play back at random? Well, we simply go to slice where it says pad and we change it to slice. We can just use the first slice. It doesn't matter, you can choose any of them because what we're going to do is play back at random anyway. So this is the slice motion feature, so that we can now press there and choose motion and set it to random. And now whenever we press this pad, it will select a random slice. So it kind of works. Essentially, it does work. You can add a tail length to these if they sound a bit choppy, and you can increase your amp envelope length. But the main thing that is giving this a nice bit of space is that I'm sending it to the reverb that I've got on return 1. But you might find that when you chop up your sample, things are going to sound a little bit staccato. You might also want to add a bit of a value, something like 20 or something to the attack, because you do find that you get some little white noise type clicks at the end, at the start and the end of the chops. So that's the other method. I myself prefer the method using the plugin straight like this and then clips, because then you get the natural sound of the plugin. Samples, as much as I love them and I prefer to work with samples over any other audible media, is the fact that they just can be a bit glitchy when you start chopping them up. And it just takes a little bit more time to program them to make them sound as smooth as the source that you sampled them from, as an example. So the third method is using key groups. Now, key groups are good. You've also got the mod matrix, but it's also the fact that they're chromatic by default. So whatever sample you load into a key group, as most of you will know, it's mapped over the entire range of notes. So if we go to program edit for the key group program, we can scroll up using our arrow at the bottom here, and we could go to the mod matrix. And there are some options in here that we can use. I'll just play you back the sound. It's a bit of a janky sound, to be honest. I just found it quickly. But as you can see, it's a tiny little section of a bigger sample. And it's just making this kind of FM donk kind of sound. So that's mapped over the entire range of notes. And if we go back to the main page and press our pad perform button, you can see that we're in chromatic mode. So that means all of these pads will play back a note. The black ones are not going to be in this scale, so they're going to be out of key with the lit up ones or the illuminated ones. So if we trigger these and record them into our sequence, we might hit what's called a bum note or something that's out of key. But I'm keeping it in chromatic mode to show you how we can get around that and keep these things in key. We still have to use these notes, of course, but let's just go back to the Keygroup program and see how I'm making these generative or random. So this is the mod matrix. We're just in the first page. The source is random 1. We've got random 1 and random 2. So these aren't LFOs, but they're similar. They're just random wave shapes or signals that are being sent as the source to modify our target, which in this case is pitch. Now, it made sense to me. Logic would tell you that you should put it 100%. Otherwise, any arbitrary number in between is not going to really make sense. You're going to get random values and the pitch is going to be random. But even so, we still have to do an extra step, and we can go via another source. So I just thought maybe it makes sense to go via the note counter. So what that's going to do is control that randomness by flicking between 2 different values. If you go any higher, it flicks between 3 or 4 values. So if you go back to note counter, which is in utilities, you can see you can choose note counter values all the way up to, I've not actually tried this, but I would assume either 64, oh actually maybe it's 64. So you can go all the way up to 64, and that's far too much. It just gets unwieldy then, I've found. But please do experiment with that, but I can't seem to control it with that amount. So note counter 2 is basically going to flip between 2 different notes for each of these pads. So it is going to give us some random variation, but it is limited to those 2 different notes. What keeps it in key, or keeps the pitch from going out of its range so it sounds wonky, is the shaper. And we have got at the end of the list quantize here. So this can quantize whatever you're trying to quantize, basically. So in this case, I'm quantizing pitch that's being randomized by our random 1 source. So whenever I press one of these notes, it will flip between the 2 different values determined by the note counter. In fact, that's flipping between 3 different values, which I think maybe is the default value and then 2 others. I assumed, because earlier I had this set to 3 and it was flipping between 3 values, but there's something else going on there, which I will admit I am not too sure about. We've got this quantization here, so what does that do? Basically, if we switch that off, let's see what happens now. So the quantization here, I'm not too sure whether that's the amount, because we've got an amount control over here. I'm not too sure what that value is actually pertaining to in terms of the quantization. Regardless, the effect is achieved, particularly if you have it, I've found just from experimenting, at 5075 or even 25550. So if we play any of these notes, it's going to flip between those 2 values at random. So it's not ideal, but at least you get to use Keygroup programs with all the facilities that they have for manipulating samples. With plugins, in the first example with the clip matrix, it's slightly different. But of course you can use the clip matrix with this. You can't just use this with plugin programs because they don't have this modulation matrix. I think some of the plugins may well have that, but it would be limited. Well, definitely OPX4 has it, so you might be able to achieve that the generative effect with notes and pitch in that. But of course, we're modifying the pitch of the sound. We're not modifying the notes for that sound, if that makes sense. So if we could modify the notes, that would be ideal, because I think it would just be a lot cleaner. Let's just try our arpeggiator with this. So it is giving us that random behavior, and for the most part it stays in key. There's occasionally the odd little weird note that pops in, I found. And of course, like I said, the sample that I'm using is a bit weird. It's not going to be any particular key or scale. It's just a random section of a larger sample. But great for experimental stuff. You can muck about with that. Obviously, if this is chops, you can integrate this with the slice motion, and it's going to be jumping around all these different notes within that sample and doing the random pitch from the mod matrix. So just some ideas for you guys. If you're interested in generative music and you want to keep things in key so they don't sound inharmonic and wonky and weird, these are 3 methods that you can use. And I would like to thank Miguel for the idea for this video. He sent it to me today, on the day that I've released this video. I've made the video on the same day. I'd just like to say apologies once again for my lack of tutorials and my general absence on YouTube. I've had a lot to deal with in my personal life in the last several months. I'm not going to go on about that, but good things, bad things. One of the good things is I got married, which is lovely. So that's one of the good things, but some of the not so good things have sort of zapped my creativity at times. But I'm back on it, and hopefully you will see more from me from this point onwards, because I'm excited obviously about all the new stuff that can be covered with the new MPC Live Mark III. Hopefully I at some point will be able to obtain one of those. But for the moment, we've got tons of features that I still think many users still haven't fully explored with the current firmware and hardware. These machines have so much mileage in them. So if you are a little bit frustrated, if you can't afford or get hold of an MPC Live Mark III, we've got a firmware that has many of the features in there. This clip matrix is, a real game changer for those of you that want to mix and match things, because obviously the old school way with MPCs was you're just fixed to that one sequence and those tracks, and you couldn't really have variations apart from some of the JJOS firmwares, which you can get on the older MPCs like the 2500 and the 1000. They had a second sequence feature. So this is, an extension of that in some regards, because we can play, one row of clips, which is essentially one sequence, but then we don't have to be stuck to what, track number 1 is doing and mix that in with what all the other tracks are doing on that first sequence, but from another clip, if that makes sense. That's the main difference with this clip editor, for those of you that aren't familiar with, the benefits of that. And then obviously, if you've got one clip here on this track, one clip here, one here, one here, and they all sound great together, you can then copy those down into a row, so that row plays exactly that combination of clips. Just a little bit of food for thought there if you're not too familiar with ways to use the clip matrix. As ever guys, all my links for everything that I do online is down below. My website, my masterclass courses, which is courses.tubedigga.com. You can email me for discounts. There's a discount code there for my MPC Masterclass. And if you've got any questions about this, or if you want to book private lessons with me, please don't hesitate to contact me at tubedigga@gmail.com. Hope everyone's good, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.